Well, hi, everybody. It's Kim Winter, CEO of Logistics Executive Group. My great pleasure to be here again hosting another session with a guest business leader and supply chain leader from somewhere in the world. And today it's my pleasure, as I say, to introduce Phillip Parsons from Sydney. Phillip is the General Manager for Logistics for Coca Cola Amatil in Sydney. He's also the President of a venerable rugby club in Sydney called the Warringah Rats, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, a championship winning club. He's also on the board of Sydney Rugby, and he has got a glittering sporting career, which we'll hear a little bit about later on. Phillip, welcome, Sydney.
No, thanks for having us, and what an introduction, Kim. Very, certainly polished it up. Very good.
I was practicing that, Phillip. And of course, a bit of disclosure. Phillip, I met you, I guess, probably 22 years ago, as I recall it, on an aircraft flying from Melbourne to Sydney.
You've got an absolutely shocking memory. It's actually 32 years ago. And you're forgiven, though. We have all aged considerably in that
Very
time.
Good. So, Phillip, we're going to talk to you a little bit about, as we do with our guests, we're really interested to hear about your upbringing. My understanding is that from many of the stories that I've heard and much that I see on LinkedIn, you're a very proud Otago man, and maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about your upbringing and where Otago is and what it's all about.
Yeah, I will. So, very proud Otago man, Highlanders man. I come from an incredibly small little town. It's sort of 3,000 feet above sea level called Naseby in central Otago. You know, one of those wonderful old gold mining towns and that district around, more famous now for its red wine, its Pinot Noir, than I think, through central Otago. It runs about 200 k's east of Queenstown. Up in the mountains, though, 2 pubs. Cricket team, rugby team in those days. It's got a sort of curling rink now. They're actually a 12-month-a-year curling rink. I was born there. My father was a rabbiter, ran the rabbit board there, and he's long gone now. But I had a wonderful childhood in that town. 100 of us. The school had about 20 kids, and then we were bussed off to the big school in Ranfurly. And I just had a wonderful, wonderful childhood up there.
Yeah, good stuff. And so at what stage did it come time to leave what was effectively a very rural area, and as you say, now very famous because of Queenstown and the deep south in New Zealand, a big tourist centre, and of course with the current conditions globally, property prices in that part of the world are going through the roof because it is unbelievable. It is God's own country, as many Kiwis will say. But so, what was the decision to leave, and what was that all about? Where were you educated, and how did you end up in Australia?
So I ended up at the Manitoto area school. Left school pretty early to be a motor mechanic. Had the sort of starting of a reasonable rugby career. I was sort of born big and lumpy and, sort of angry mountain man type, and had this great opportunity to go and play rugby in Dunedin for Dunedin Marist. And in those days, rugby was amateur, and I landed there from the country to the big city of Dunedin, and they had traffic lights and elevators and stuff, and it was a pretty exciting time. And I got through, and I was playing first grade for Dunedin Marist, and in those days you actually played with All Blacks. Frank Oliver would run out, and Gary Goodfellow, and you had others there. Gary Sayre, I remember, was playing for the other clubs, and it was a great time in that early 78 to sort of 81 time. And I did something really stupid. I ended up getting quite a large. I got a bit angry one day and got quite a large suspension. I don't think I've ever shared this with you. And so I had a couple of weeks on the sideline, and I'd met a guy previously when I'd been over in England from Warrnambool in Australia. And in those days I'd written him a letter, and he said, well, and I was doing all right at rugby till the sort of that moment. And I ended up coming over to Australia to play for South Warrnambool, to play Aussie rules. And quite hysterical, really. I was 6'4", I was 110 then, quite fit. So I suppose I sort of looked the part, and had this trial with Fitzroy, and they realised that I couldn't catch and I couldn't kick. And I wasn't much use to anybody, but I was a big lump. So I ended up getting a couple of seasons for South Warrnambool playing Aussie rules and had a great time there. And then ended up in Perth and answered an ad. I said, I can't keep doing this anymore. I'm not going anywhere. And ended up going to Perth. And in those days, TNT were big sponsors of rugby union in Australia. People might remember the referees running around with TNT on the back of them, and got over to Perth, and oddly enough, didn't end up working for TNT, ended up working for Main Nicholas in those days. And almost sort of half the rugby world worked for Main Nicholas and throwing boxes and express freight sheds and
that's right.
lots of Kiwis and South Africans. That's how I started my career to become a logistician.
Wow.
A few adventures along the way there, short and version.
And if I track through your career, you've always been pretty well at the front of the pack, Phil. The fact that not just the fact that you're 6'4" and weigh a couple of tons, just the fact you've always been in leadership roles, and you seem to have carried that through. As I say, you're on the board of Sydney Rugby. Correct me if I'm wrong. You're the president of Warringah Rats and took them to a championship from nowhere a few years ago. And I happened to be in Australia at the time and came along to that championship game. It was glorious days for a working class suburb and all of the above. But you also, your personal sporting career included being Mr. New South Wales, which is the most populous state in Australia. Do you want to talk to us about that, Phillip?
I wouldn't. There's some photos around somewhere in the odd trophy. So I played a lot of rugby, but I bucketed myself up a bit and thought I'd go to the gym. And I've got one of those lumpy Central Otago bodies that reacts well to lamb chops for breakfast and lamb chops for lunch, and started throwing a bit of tin around in the gym and thought, if I'm going to do this, I might as well polish it up a bit and see how I go on stage. So me and another Kiwi guy thought we'd enter ourselves in a couple of bodybuilding competitions. And I guess, it sort of all looks a bit odd up there, I suppose. But the reality is it was the hardest I'd ever trained, to be honest, in my life. I really trained. I'd taken a few years off work. I was doing an MBA in logistics at the time at Sydney Uni. And I thought, well, I'm doing this. I'll start throwing the weight around. And I sort of reacted well to it and got all up, much to the merriment of my father. He never sort of couldn't live with it a bit. There's a few photos. He actually turned up to one of the competitions. And it was a good time, good experience, very disciplined sport, by the way. You sort of had 3 minutes of glory on stage for, 5 hours of training a day for 2 years. So, it was good.
No, I understand. And look, just for a more serious issue for a moment, you've taken that leadership in sport, and especially with Warringah Rats Rugby Club, to some very interesting corporate responsibility stuff, CSR. You've, as the president of the club, for the last decade or so that I'm aware of, you've been mounting annual trips offshore to many wild and wonderful places around the world to help develop rugby, to work with impoverished or less than fortunate communities with rugby training and taking supplies and educating kids in far-flung places, including, of course, as a disclosure or a disclaimer that you guys were awesome in 2011, as I seem to recall it, when you mounted a trip to Kenya to support an organisation which I'm the chairman of, which was Oasis Africa, which has educated over 8,000 kids in the slums of Kenya.
Wonderful.
Tell us about that whole project and why you did that and what it's meant in terms of leadership in the club and development of some of your young players.
We call it Books and Boots, and it was always about a couple of things. One, it was about personal development for the young men and women of our club, but it was also about showing them that we're very fortunate here I live on the northern beaches of Sydney, and it's an insular peninsula, they actually call us. It's a beautiful part of the world, but it was a great opportunity for us to go, well, how can we make a difference? How can we have some fun? But how can we actually be involved in the personal development of these young men and women at our club and mix those two together and share the joy of rugby, but also leave a difference behind? And we built that Books and Boots philosophy. And to your point, Camo, we've donated something like 20,000 books, thousands of rugby balls. We've been to we started off in Kenya, your wonderful association to West Africa, and we went to Canberra to school. It was a life-changing. I mean, two of those guys turned around and went straight back to work for NGOs in Africa. It was how the impact it had on people.
Wow.
Kenya, we've been to Cuba, Fiji, Chile, China, got to go through them all. Sri Lanka, Alice Springs locally. That was a great one too. Probably missed a few out there. And 10 of them. So, if every single tour we have, the young men and women come back different. They certainly come back more humble, and they certainly come back realising that, we all need to contribute in this life to make a difference. And if you can, you should. So we've built schools, we've put water tanks in Sri Lanka, we put the bridge over the River Apu in Kenya for those kids so they could get into school, and, wonderful library we built there. It's still got the Rats logo on the wall.
Correct.
It's been, it's a funny, we always have two games of rugby. So you have that sort of the rugby part, and we run school clinics, and then we get involved in the charitable part. And of course, there's the nights off where you go out and hydrate with the locals and have some laughs, and then back it up again with a kids clinic. I don't think there's been a single tour where we go to places where you wouldn't normally go as a tourist, and it's not a single tour where people don't end up in tears with the harshness of life, and it's a pretty tough world out there, and we're very blessed on the northern beaches, and they certainly come back. I think they come back more rounded individuals and certainly more humble from it.
Yeah, it was awesome. I had the honour of being with you guys on that trip for a couple of weeks or so, and just seeing how the impact on players and people, it was like 60 or 70 people, I think, in the end you took over there, and the impact you had on those communities, and people to this day, Oasis Africa is still booming and going stronger than ever, as I say, in Kenya, and people still talk about it. The rugby jerseys are still there, the libraries, the bridges, these things make a huge social impact. So well done on the leadership in that space, and I know you guys are a shining light in the Australian rugby scene for some of the stuff that you've done. Turning to business then, you say you came from Main Nicholas. Main Nicholas, to those of our audience who are not familiar with Australia, was one of the founding logistics companies in Australia. Many of Australia and APAC's leading senior executives these days all had their upbringings in Main Nicholas. There are hundreds of senior executives came spawned out of that area, out of that company. Tell us a little bit about what your role is now, and how the last year or so has been. What changes you've seen in the sector? What's the consumer behaviour been like? How's that impacted on the Coca Amatil? You're the GM of logistics, very dynamic business, beverages, of course. Tell us a little bit about what's been happening in the industry and what you see as the trends moving forward.
Yeah, very. Thanks for that. That's some questions. I'll try and cover them all. I'll start back in March last year, I think, Kim, when we first went into our first COVID lockdown. I've had a few senior roles in business, and I've worked for most of the powerful men in Australia at some time or another, and I've experienced most business issues. I've had quite a broad range of experience, but this was all new to me, and it was something that I had to really spend quite a few years reflecting on daily how we're going to get through it. So when it struck, I really wasn't just about protecting the business. When we start talking about mental health and resilience, and that we really started to go into some places where I really wasn't equipped at the time, I think, to handle it. So it wasn't always about trucks and sheds and supply chain. It was about our people. And I'm very proud of the fact that Coke, we didn't lose any people through COVID. We certainly didn't, take 10% off everybody, or we worked really hard to pull out as much cost as we can without impacting people's lives. But the mental health impact on the staff to this day is still there. We're not suffering like other countries. I acknowledge that, but still, I think it was something that blindsided me a bit. And I'm very fortunate at Coke. We had plenty of great opportunities. There were some great coaching opportunities and resources available to us through that. That isolation for people. We have a lot of younger people who were stuck at home, their family in Australia. So I should explain, I look after the logistics part of CCA, 700 trucks, 54 sheds. There's a variety of infrastructure that sits under that, a control tower with sort of 60 people in it that manages the data and processes the orders that come in by the sales team. And it all changed, to your point. The shape of it all changed dramatically overnight, but our volume didn't move. It moved to retail, it moved to the groceries, and the grocery stores couldn't cope. And Pam might say, why is it important that Coke, why is it suddenly critical product Coke? Well, it's not just, we have a wide range of SKUs, by the way, a couple of thousand SKUs in our network. We also work for Veeam, Suntory and Monster. But it's also about protecting that 3,500 people's jobs, as well as the shareholders' investment and EBIT, but also making sure people, carried on their lives in some sort of normality. And it was chaos. It was really difficult. We couldn't get into sheds. There was just panic buying was an interesting phenomenon here. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but you're in Dubai, but panic buying here was just crazy. And then
you had a lot of you had a lot of lockdown. I mean, Australia and New Zealand are pretty, famous for it's still till now about the control of COVID. But you had a lot of lockdowns, a lot of hard lockdowns. I think warehouses were limited to 30% of staff. So, I mean, how were those?
Get through borders. We even now today, I have pickers in the warehouses in Victoria. It's 35 degrees wearing face masks picking cases. Now, they've been doing that on and off for a very long time. The resilience of that team is fantastic. It wasn't just the lockdown of that. Through all of this, we had border disruption. It's 5 hours now to clear the border. There's a 5-hour queue between Melbourne and Adelaide today, waiting time to get across the border in Adelaide today from Melbourne. 5-hour wait. And there's sort of logbook, there's driving hour restrictions in Australia. And at the same time, we had industrial action on the wharfs. So not only was there a global problem with the balancing of global network supply chains, there was industrial action happened at the wharfs at the same time. So all of a sudden, the arterial supply chain, the arteries of supply chain in Australia become very clogged up. Yeah. And today it's no different. And it was interesting for us. And I think what peak was, what we call peak, which is Christmas here, had a very funny shape to it. We lost sales in the middle of the CBD, but we had more sales 300 kilometres out from Sydney. So it's Sydney, Australia, about 300 k's out from every capital cities where people feel safe going on holiday because they might not get caught in a COVID lockdown. So, it all moved, and we had to restructure our network and our line haul and, bigger trucks out to little towns, and everyone else did too. Everyone was very collaborative through it all, still today. But it's jammed. We are completely jammed. Trains are all full. There's no coastal shipping for Australia. It doesn't start till March. Yeah. We're jammed tight.
So that's interesting reflection for people who are not used to that Australian environment as a bit of a case study, if you'd like. Yeah. But let's just drill down for a little minute on you and leadership. I mean, as you mentioned before, you've worked for some of the biggest players in Australia. You worked for a guy called Kerry Packer, who is legend and iconic in Australia. He's passed away now, but the Packer family still is in the news big time, even in the last 24 hours. Yeah. You've worked for Toll, which is the biggest publicly listed logistics company in Australia, now owned by Japan Post. The Linfox family, which is iconic in Australia, the largest privately owned logistics company probably, or certainly in Australia, but more than far into Asia as well. And you as a leader, you've developed, I mean, one of the things I've observed about you over the years, you've got a fairly well-developed EQ. You really relate to people in a big way. That's common to you across a lot of social activities I know you've been involved in. How have you, in the last year, had to really draw resources from within yourself? How have you been tested, and how do you think you've reacted? You were just saying before that, you maybe weren't prepared like many leaders weren't. What have you drawn on to get yourself through, and where are you going now? I'm more interested now about where are you going, what are the leadership attributes that you're using, and what are you projecting forward for your capabilities?
We talk about capability, but I think it's about, there are two parts to this for me that came out of this for me that I needed to work on. and I'm quite simplistic in its view, right? There's ruthless prioritization of what you need to do to you fish where the fish are. So that ruthless prioritization of what you do in a day became critical because time was just consumed. And I get that when you look at those people, and I work for Coates Hire and for the Stokes family too. So when I look at all those great leaders, the Packers, the Foxes, all those guys ruthlessly prioritise their life. They fish where the fish are. And, think about that application to that for me. It's the same at Coke. We had to really ruthlessly prioritise. And there's another thing I talk to my staff about is when something goes wrong, you need to step through it and make another decision. You don't make but stuff in life, things are going to go wrong, right? And Kim, you and I probably cut from the same mold in this. Both of us don't reflect on it for very long, and we move on pretty quickly in our lives. And even in our personal lives, because, you need to move on. And when things go wrong in business, you need to keep moving on. You need to make more decisions. And we triangulate those decisions. I talk about two-way decisions, Kim. I talk about reversible decisions and decisions that aren't reversible. And if it's a reversible decision, make it quickly. And then if it's wrong, make another decision and keep making it. If it's an unreversible decision, like we're going to invest $80 million in a shed, make sure you get plenty of people in a room and make the right decision because you can't reverse that one. But if it's about moving from road to rail to sea to train, whatever it might be, they're all reversible decisions, so make them quickly. So those two things for me, ruthlessly prioritise your time, fish where the fish are, and make sure that you're making decisions quickly. And if it's a wrong decision, make another one. Step through it. Don't. My old man had a great expression, it's a bit rude, but if you stand in dog shit, you don't walk it through the house and stomp on it complaining you stood in dog shit. You wash it off your boot outside and you move on with your life. You got to move on with your life. Don't stand it and trample it all through the house and complain about it. Get on with it. So they were the two learnings for me, I think.
Okay, good. Well, as you say, very simplistic. I mean, I think most Kiwis are fairly close, if not in a rural upbringing and background, and
that's right.
Those simple country sort of views in life can stand you in a good stead moving forward. Just reflecting broader on the parachute, overlooking the industry in Australia or industry that you have influence in. What do you see happening in logistics? Any major trends happening in logistics, whether it's been consumer-driven or supplier-driven, or what's happening in the next 12 months? What may we see between now and December as major trends happening in the market and logistics and supply?
A couple of things I see about interstate. We do interstate. That's travelling between Perth and Sydney and up the coast. That interstate capacity is full, and it shouldn't be full in January and February. It should be half empty, and it's full. So traditionally, we'd be sending stuff by boat. By some answer, sort of $1,200 a box to send it by boat from Sydney to Perth. We're now spending $20,000 to send it by truck to Perth. So that arterial clog, it's completely clogged. So putting that aside and that network design change, it's going to be about people, Kim. There's two things that have come out of this for me. One is labour hire companies, and you and I, I used to use you before I think we had a labour hire part to your business. I think the time is coming for a change in that model. We've seen that through COVID, having people working at multiple sites, moving around. There's also a sort of a dilemma for me personally that probably came to light COVID. Whatever was bad in COVID got worse in COVID. So when you went into COVID with a model that was slightly flawed, or a business that was slightly unwell, or a relationship that was a bit broke, when we went into COVID, it sort of highlighted it. I think it's highlighted that model's broken. And it's also a little bit unjust too. It's probably the bit of the socialism coming out of me, but I think it's time that we moved away from labour hire companies and gave people better lives in that space. And I'm certainly looking at our model to decide how much we rely on them and perhaps moving back to a more fairer model of employing people direct. And then it aligns up with our technology changes this year are going to be dramatic. So you have this capability problem as well across the top. You have a capability problem. You have a labour model that maybe has been tested to be seen to be flawed and a little bit unfair. You put the two over the top. really comes back to people and investment in people. And I think we've got on foot something like $45 million worth of supply chain technology impacting our sheds this year, which is a transport management system and a warehouse management through SAP and some automation in our sheds. And I've got to invest in people to use that technology. So, and I think we've got some subsidies coming off here in March. The government's provided subsidies. We don't get it at Coke, but JobKeeper they call it. But for me, that'll be a big trend. Quality labour and holding on to it.
Yeah, sorry, butt in, Phil, but talk to me a little bit about, just briefly, digitisation. What's happening with is digitisation going to help your business moving forward over the next 12 months or so, or you've been a big adopter previously? Where are you positioned in that whole line of attack?
There's two parts of it to us. I think it's a bit this customer facing, and that's certainly even today we've upgraded all of our online ordering, apps on phones for our retailers to order product. We have, touchless deliveries right now. We do all of those things. We've got connected callers, we call it. We're connecting all our fridges electronically to ordering systems, so we can tell how many times the door's open, what transactions can look like. But the digitisation at the back end, of course, is leaning into quicker reporting. There's some new digitisation of some of the quality controls in our manufacturing lines that have, cameras that capture faults on labels or fill lines on bottles and things. So, for us, it's a continual investment in that space. I don't know whether or not we've particularly doubled down this year because of COVID, but I think we have a strong pipeline of I don't know whether I can say we're at the pointy end of it, that's for sure, but we certainly, it's part of our ongoing strategy, but it has to be a business case. It just can't be for the sake of, wouldn't it be great to have one of those? It's got to stand up on its own. Okay. I get a bit lost on some of it. I just sit on the Urban Hub. I sit on some think tank groups, and people talk about driverless trucks, and as soon as they got a driverless truck's fine, they need nanotechnology and cartons so they can walk into the stores on their own. So when they've got the nanotechnology ready for the cases, I'll be using the driverless truck. So the digital technology, I'm waiting for it. In the meantime, I still need people.
Awesome. Yeah, interesting viewpoints. Thanks. Look, I like to wrap up by asking all of our guests a couple of snapfire questions. One of them is about your tips on leadership. So we all know there's a lot of people in the world doing it real tough at the moment. There's a lot of companies that have been behind the eight ball. A lot of companies have been at the front of it and benefited. We've seen e-commerce explode. We've seen a lot of upside in technology and all of those stories that we've seen on the business pages globally. I want to draw you just to the issue of people coming in, if young people coming in, and of course, one of the upsides, if you can call it that, out of the last 12 months or so is the fact that supply chain has probably never had such a high profile, whether it's about e-commerce, the blast in e-commerce, now vaccine distribution, what have you. And I think supply chain logistics leaders globally are looking to seize on that to attract people now that people have got more visibility on what supply chain does and what it's all about. And it's not just a backroom set of circumstances that any business might be dealing with, but it's a driver in business. If you were to give one or two tips to young people wanting to get into logistics as an industry, as opposed to many of us and many of my guests, including yourself and myself, who just happened to wander into supply chain many decades ago, what tips would you give people it's looking into it as a career?
I think, first of all, there's plenty of tertiary courses available globally. Get yourself in as a graduate somewhere. I think one of the big things for me is if I'm looking at bringing people into the business at any level, I always say just hire the smartest people you can find, and I always say play team sport because they're used to being coached and they're used to a referee, which always helps. But what I find interesting is that one of the big skills I look for with young people when I bring them, their ability to look outside to look in. So people will come to say, I don't have any experience in supply chain, but if you can demonstrate that you've been looking out to look in, if you build a knowledge base up of what's happening in the industry, I'm always that understanding, because it's not always about benchmarking against yourself internally. It's about what's happening out there. And there's never been a better time in the world to do that. That you're always great podcasts. There's plenty of stuff online. There's everyone knows there's that whole digital knowledge building experience. So get yourself, there's plenty of tertiary courses around transport. Get yourself in at the right level, but always look outside to look in. Always be standing in front of me going, did you know what, Pepsi are doing? Do you know what Mars are doing? Do you know they've got one of these? Always be demonstrating. Don't go into businesses and benchmark against yourself. Benchmark against the outside world for the first tip. And then I've got some wonderful young people that drive me nuts that do that to me all day. And we've really grown from that, I think. I think our supply chain's certainly fitter and more flexible because of that.
Awesome. Hey, Phillip, really enjoyed catching up with you. It's been way too long, and your career and your life has been all about leadership and pushing the boundaries. And you've taken a few tumbles along the way and always managed to get yourself back up. But you've always been larger than life in all the business and social environments that I've observed over the years. I can't help but think that politics must be calling you somewhere along the lines. Mayor of Sydney, maybe one day. Who knows?
Mayor of Devoy, yeah, maybe. and Kim, I appreciate the kind words too, but your charitable, drivers. There's one. You're probably closer to heaven than I am, Kim. Boy, about a million miles, mate. You do. Your whole life's been dedicated to serve, and even in your role now, you're part of giving growth to people in their roles and supporting them, and your work with Oasis Africa has changed the lives of so many people, and you're certainly one step closer to heaven than me. So thank you too for all that work you do.
No, awesome, Phil. Kind words and greatly appreciated. Phillip Parsons in Sydney, we're going to let you get on with your evening. We wish you well. Stay safe. Keep up the good job in Australia with what you guys are doing, and look forward to catching up with you soon. To our audience, thank you so much for joining us. And again, thanks, Phil.
See you guys. See you. Kia ora.